to forget that, but it still has its and after writing a series of these reports, my publisher came to me and said, you know, you really have to do this as a book. So that was kind of the start of the book. But really the book started in the early 1990s as a young FBI agent. Thought that that was something from the past, where when in the early 1990s I was asked to go undercover in Los Angeles in the aftermath of the civil unrest following the police killing of Rodney King. The white supremacist groups were organizing, hoping to take advantage of further unrest, and I was asked to go undercover with groups of skinheads, and really had to learn from the beginning about this movement. And what I was taught, or what I believed was true, was that these were ignorant. They signed me up for newsletters, and more I was seeing how deeply embedded it is throughout our society. And as Juan said, you know, I hope it's clear that I am not anti-law enforcement, but one of the warnings that we got, and this was worked off a joint terrorism task force where there were state and local and other federal agencies all working together on this case, but we were all brought together, and my supervisor said, look, you know, we all know that there are white supremacist sympathizers in all of our agencies. So you're going to have to be very careful in how you talk about this case when you go back to your own department. So just, you know, keep that in mind. You know, we have an undercover agent and we're concerned about his safety out there. So, you know, keep this one very closely held. That same warning came out in 2006 in written form. So I can talk about it. It came out again in 2015 when the FBI's counterterrorism policy guide leaked to the public. And in this guide, what it says is, it instructs agents working domestic terrorism investigations against white supremacists and far-right militias that their subjects, the people they're investigating in those cases, are, and this is a quote, often have active links to law enforcement. And it instructs them not to use traditional methods in counterterrorism cases, not to use the terrorist watch list in the way they would use it for any other kind of terrorist, because the police have access to the terrorist watch list. So they intentionally take a tool out of their toolbox because they know this is a problem. But there is no policy in the FBI that instructs agents how to protect the community from these white supremacist affiliated officers and agents. And that's really the missing piece here, that even when this report I wrote came out, I was expecting to hear a lot of pushback from law enforcement, and in fact was called to testify in front of Congress. And there was another law enforcement officer there who was trying to give the other side. But really all he said was, yeah, we acknowledge this is a problem, but it's not nearly as big as Mike says it is. To which my response was, what is the acceptable number of white supremacists in law enforcement that we have? That if we all acknowledge that it's a problem, that if even law enforcement is acknowledging it's a problem we have to solve. And because obviously for my cases, the beauty of Northwest militants. So there are law enforcement officers who are being discriminated against because of their race or ethnicity. There are law enforcement officers who are put in danger because of these affiliations some officers have with these militant groups. You know, one of the things that I've reminded police officers every time I talk to them is white supremacists kill law enforcement officers. You know, you know, from the Unite the Right rally to the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, we saw these to film themselves and then using that violence to promote themselves within the movement. And too often we saw law enforcement look the other way. And during that period, when I had the opportunity to talk to law enforcement leaders, I would always say, these people are going to hurt your officers. You know, you have to instruct your officers that this is not fun and games. These aren't people you can buddy up with. They are dangerous. And of course, it was only a few months later. In fact, it was a few months after I testified. 2006 intelligence reports disavowed its counterterrorism policy hearing. And then 3 months later was January 6th, when over 100 police officers were injured by these same militant groups that had gained strength over the previous years because of the lack of enforcement action. So I so much appreciate that you guys are interested in this issue, and I so much appreciate the senators for coming out, because it's really important that we start talking about this issue and we come up with a plan that can solve it for once and for all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to ask some questions. We were able to get a few questions from those who submitted during the sign-up. And so we're going to start with the first question, which is, how did you start working for the FBI? What was it like? Was there a time when you didn't want to go undercover? And if so, why? And what did you learn from tracking white supremacists? Obviously more than one question, but...
Thank you very much. You know, I was one of those kids who was just fascinated with the FBI from the time I was a little kid. And I told my parents, they said, you know, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I said, well, I'm going to go to law school and join the FBI. And my dad, who was an Army officer, loved the FBI part, and my mom loved the law school part. And I actually got my appointment to the FBI the day I graduated from law school, and I had no second plan. But my law school, you'd smarten up. And you know, it was a childhood dream come true, and I loved the job, and I loved getting to do the work. And I, coming out of the academy, I never thought I would do undercover work. I never thought I'd be any good at it, or be selected for it. And then one day, one of my friends came in and said, you know, I have this investigation of this neo-Nazi skinhead group, and he's into this group. But, you know, really frankly, they were very good instructors. You know, I presented myself as somebody who was open to recruitment, and they were very good, both instructing me on how white supremacy works in this country. But, you know, as a law enforcement officer, I was more concerned with the illegal activities they were involved in, so I had to focus on those. But one of the things that I found very difficult was just having a conversation with them, because, you know, you can't talk about how the Mariners did last night, right? That's a multicultural thing. That's part of, you know, that they're not going to watch that. You can't talk about mainstream politics, because they don't, at that point, they really didn't pay much attention to that. I remember when Barack Obama started running for president, I was fielding all these calls from journalists who were saying, oh my gosh, the white supremacists are going to go crazy over this. And I said, no, the white supremacists think every president has been a Jewish. Right? You know, this isn't as big a change for them as you might suspect. It's more of a change for the rest of us, which I think highlights the issue that white supremacy is more of a foundational thing in our country rather than some extremist element. And the case was successful, and I learned a lot. And then because of the success in that case, I was asked to come up here, and I ended up spending the rest of my career working in all kinds of criminal undercover cases, but certainly learning about how embedded white supremacism is in our institutions, including in the FBI. I mean, the FBI is still, decades after J. Edgar Hoover, who wouldn't allow women agents and wouldn't allow black agents to come in. Every director since then, he died in 1972, every director since then has said diversifying the FBI is essential to serving our national security and law enforcement purpose, except they don't actually do it. The FBI is still almost 80% male and 75% male and almost 80% white. That's the primary law enforcement agency in our country. So if the agents who work there don't represent our society, they can't understand our society well enough. They can't understand the needs of all our various communities. So there are the difficulty in getting change, I think, is highlighted in that. That even, in a law enforcement agency, all these years after the Civil Rights Movement, we still have a lack of diversity in our important institutions. So I've spent my time since I left the FBI in 2004 trying to...
This book, or what motivated you to write?
Important. And the New Press is a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting progressive authors. So if you ever see a book published by the New Press, buy it, support them. They do great work and make sure that these voices get a big platform.
Thank you. There was a question in here that I feel is very relevant to what's going on with our relatives here in the and so one question here, let's see. How can we learn anything about ICE and the current state of affairs from your work?
Increasing tempo of ICE raids and the tactics they're using is the use of other federal agencies and in many places other state and local agencies. One thing that the FBI knew even in the 1990s when I was undercover was that there aren't enough agents out there to do the work that they need to do, right? That people don't realize how small the FBI is. It has such a large impact on our society and our government, but it's actually a small agency. It's only about 30, it varies between 30 and 35,000 employees. Only 12,000 of those are agents that are out there doing work, and a good portion, at least a third, almost a half, are managers. So they're sitting in the office doing paperwork. So that really only leaves about 8,000 to 9,000 agents out there doing work all across the country and around the world. So they know that they have to rely on other law enforcement agencies, not just other federal agencies like the DEA, Homeland Security Investigations, which is part of ICE, but also, and more importantly, state and local law enforcement. Right? That's why on the cases that I worked in the California case with the neo-Nazis, very closely with the LAPD, here with the Bellingham Police Department. It was essential that we had that support from state and local law enforcement. And the FBI knows that in every field. It's not just joint terrorism task forces. It's high-intensity drug trafficking area task forces. To work under the rules that state and local law enforcement demand. And this came up in Portland when the FBI's rules changed and they were allowed to investigate people even when they had no basis, and the rules that the Portland police operate under. And in these task force arrangements, the local police have to agree to operate through the FBI's rules. And if the FBI's rules are less exacting than the local rules, that means that there's no way the people of Portland could determine whether their police officers were following the rules that the people of the city of Portland thought were essential to that police department. And the city council couldn't know whether they had control over that police department when they were working in that capacity. So Portland pulled out of the police department. At first I thought this is no big deal. You know, everybody knows Portland is crunchy granola, not really, you know, a very progressive area. But when I went to testify, sitting next to me also testifying was the general counsel of the FBI, who had flown out from Washington, because the FBI knew that local police pulling out of a task force is going to be a huge issue for them. And they couldn't allow even one little city in Northwest United States to pull out. Since then, I worked with the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, can control this problem. They should know who these masked people with guns are running around our community. And they should document, but ICE doesn't dress like ICE. So, you know, they're just dressing up like militiamen and going out in the community pretending to be ICE and committing crimes. It breeds incivility and criminal activity, and it breeds resistance, right? It's natural if somebody who you don't know starts pushing you around. It's natural to resist that pushing around. And you know, when I was an FBI agent, when we went out to do an arrest in public, what did we do? We all put on those raid jackets you see on TV now with the big letters on the back, FBI, the big letters on the front, FBI, because we wanted people to know we were the good guys. We were the ones that were out there trying to protect the community, and so that the community would know this is an official action. This isn't some off-the-books violence for violence sake, because that protected us. And you know, it's a very dangerous thing that they're doing, and it's dangerous to state and local law enforcement when they don't know who's going out there. They're getting calls that somebody's being kidnapped. They're reacting as if it's a kidnapping. It's only a matter of time before there's some tragedy involved in this situation, and it's something that can be corrected tomorrow. If the state and local police would say, look, we're pulling out of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, we're pulling out of the Violent Crimes Task Force, we're pulling out of all these task forces, and we're going to reduce our cooperation with the federal government. Do people, you know, and I know one of the issues here in Washington is the sharing of information between state and local law enforcement and ICE. But you have to understand that the information sharing environment that law enforcement has built over the last 25 years is redundant, right? So including all of these task forces, there's also a state and local fusion centers. Do people know what fusion centers are? This is an example of my failure as an advocate. When I left the FBI and went over and started working at the ACLU, the first paper I wrote was called "What's Wrong with Fusion Centers?" Fusion centers are these interesting, it's a network of intelligence centers that share information between, you know, if there's some restriction about getting information here in Washington, there's federal money involved, the FBI is there, DHS is there. In trouble, the federal government goes, that's not us, that's state and local. And state and local often don't have the resources to do the kind of oversight they would need to understand what these centers are doing. So that's one hub that is designed to break down all the rules that protect our privacy and that limit law enforcement authority to collect information about us. So it's really important that we understand what's going on there, and particularly in this situation involving ICE, make it very clear.
From white supremacy.
So that's a great question. What they can do is enact a policy that addresses white supremacy, and particularly white supremacy in law enforcement. You know, unfortunately, there's no national strategy coming from the federal government. And the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department is probably not going to be as effective for some time in enforcing civil rights. And that's the way our federalized system works, right? It's a check against abuse. During the civil rights era, when state and local governments, using their police officers, were targeting people who were organizing for civil rights, the federal government had to step in and say, no, we're going to protect the civil rights of the people in these states. And now we have a bit of the opposite, where it's really up to states. We have a separate sovereign, right? We vote for our city council members, we vote for our state elected representatives. They have a responsibility to protect our civil rights too, even if it's the federal government that's infringing. And to be clear, there is a supremacy clause in the Constitution. They can't impede federal law enforcement, but they can certainly create a situation where they demand cooperation in exchange for the things the federal government wants from state and local governments and state and local law enforcement.
Thank you. Let me see here. Let's see. For our last, because I think we're just about wrapping up here. So I'm just wanting to see maybe something along this line. So how do we, as a community or individual, approach a situation where somebody may be being verbally or physically assaulted by clear white supremacists, and when you have white supremacists in law enforcement, and that can create inaction or even lack of accepting reports or collecting any sort of data. I understand it can be very hard for even as a community member when you're reporting such actions, but I'm wondering what as we as a community or as individuals can do in a situation where maybe this person is in law enforcement or has law enforcement protection or networks. How do we protect ourselves from those who fail to protect us?
Fortunately today we all have a video camera in our pocket, and a lot of, going back to the killing of George Floyd, right? That absent that video, or frankly, earlier in my career, going back to the beating of Rodney King, right? That was something those communities were experiencing on a regular basis, talked about on a regular basis, but people didn't believe that. Document what you can, and make sure that you report it. Make sure that your elected representatives know and have access to that information, and I think that's the reason that we're all concerned about this issue right now, is because people out in the field are documenting what's happening, and people across the country can see it and are saying, no, this isn't how we want our government agents to be acting. So that's really the best advice I have. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. This has really been terrific. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Juan. And thank you for the wonderful tamales. Oh, so good. Thanks very much. And thank you for being here as well.
Hi, sorry, my name's Angela. I'm the Secretary of Unidos, so I'm just popping in real quick to let you know that we know you might have more questions about this topic and want to pick the brain more of Mr. Mike German here. If so, please feel free to grab an index card and put it in the question basket. We'll see what we can do to get your questions answered, but we want to thank you all again. We're going to take a short little break, so feel free to use the facilities, grab some refreshments, and then we'll get started around 2:05, 2:10 for the panel. So thank you. And thank you again, Mike German.
Oh. How can I? I'm bringing you all back. I know you are enjoying these conversations, and I hate to cut your conversation short, but we're going to get ready for our panelists. So I'm going to ask that you come down to your seats, and we're going to get ready to start here. I'm so glad to see community engaging. This is what we love to see. Okay. Let's see here. All right, folks. So we have our 4 panelists here today. I'm gonna go through each panelist and give a short bio. And so we're gonna start with our author, Mike German. Mike German is a fellow in the Brennan Center's Liberty and National Security Program, which seeks to ensure that the U.S. government respects human rights and fundamental freedoms in conducting the fight against terrorism. A former special agent with the FBI, his work focuses on law enforcement and intelligent oversight and reform. He wrote the book that he was speaking about today, Policing White Supremacy, The Enemy Within, and I highly suggest you guys read his book if you have not already. And then our next panelist is Kate Bitz. Kate Bitz works as a Momentum Program Senior Organizer in Western State Center's program on countering white nationalism and anti-democracy movements. Her focus is on supporting communities around the region and the country as they organize for justice and push back on bigotry. She is the lead author of Western State Center's 2023 publication, Protecting Pride, an Organizing Guide. And there goes my page, I apologize. Into office, he served as a state trooper for 31 years and was named Trooper of the Year in 1992. He also served a total of 13 years in the United States Coastal Guard, and including time patrolling the waters off of Alaska. He was elected to Snohomish County Sheriff in 2007 and served as the Snohomish County Executive from 2013 to 2015. A longtime resident of Mill Creek who has lived in Snohomish County for 38 years, Lovick is married to a retired teacher. He still volunteers regularly at the elementary school which his children attended and cooks many of his famous John Lovick's deep-fried turkeys for charity events, which I've heard is very good. And lastly, we have Senator Manka Dhingra is a deputy majority leader of Washington State Senate. She brings 2 decades of experience as a prosecutor and a behavioral health expert to her role as chair of the Senate Law and Justice Committee. Additionally, while in office, she has sponsored and passed legislation addressing wide ranges of issue areas, including curbing domestic violence, sexual assault, preventing firearm violence, providing property tax relief for seniors and people with disabilities, persecuting financial fraud, and reforming the criminal justice system with evidence-based approach. And so I just want to give a warm welcome to our panelists today. Now, for our first question, so these questions are open to all on the panel. Don't feel the pressure to answer, but please, if you'd like. So our first question is, what do each of you wish the public knew about the work that you do?
Okay. Since Senator Lovick told me to go ahead, I will. You know, I wish people understood that policies are not made in a vacuum. Policies are made because people engage with their lawmakers and people demand change. And that's one of the things I talk a lot about, because people always want to know, what are you doing to us? And I said, we're not doing anything to you. It's all of us coming together to change the direction of government. And I'll just say, when I won my election in 2017, thank you to so many in this room right here, that's when the Democrats took control of the majority and turned Washington blue. And since then, when we take a look at so many policies that we have passed in the state, they have been passed in most respect because people have organized, people have come down to Olympia, they have called and made meetings and appointments with their legislators, and they have really fought for these policies. And so that's what I want to leave with everyone, is that our work is done with community. And the more you engage, the more your voice is heard, and you can really take ownership of the direction in which the state is going. And I'll just tell you one thing really quickly. In my 2017 campaign, I had engaged the youth. I had a huge youth campaign committee. We had 70 youth that were engaged. And it wasn't just about the campaign, because every year since then, I sponsor at least one bill that the youth have brought to me, many times two. And these young people have amazing ideas, and they want to fight the status quo. They don't take answers like, oh, we've never done that before. That's not acceptable. And so it's not just about making sure people can volunteer for campaigns. It's about, can you then make policy changes once someone is in office? And so that's what I want to leave with all of you, is you guys are empowered to make sure you can fight for the changes that you want to see.
First of all, I'm just really, really pleased to be here, and I want to say it's a great honor to sit next to Senator Dhingra. I moved onto her committee but something else he said, and it's with me now, and it will be with me forever. He said the easy stuff, and he didn't say stuff, I'm trying to clean it up a little bit. I think people that know him would know what he said. He said the easy stuff was done last year, or 10 years ago. The stuff that we do is important stuff, but we're going to have to work hard to make it happen. And we want you to know that the work that we do is vital, but you are also vital. Your voice really, really matters. I was sitting here just thinking a few seconds ago. There was a lady here, and I don't want to embarrass her, but her name is Pam Hurst. Pam Hurst walked up to me, and I was thinking about something that Mahatma Gandhi said a few years ago. He said, the weak can never forgive, but only the strong can forgive. She walked up to me, and I don't want to embarrass you, but she said, I want you to know that I forgive you. I understand why you had to take some of the votes you took. And that meant a lot in my office. And I know you've seen it, and it says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What we are doing here, groups like this, we are going to change that culture. And before we leave, I'll tell you how we're changing that culture. So thank you very, very much. Sorry I took so much time.
This thing's very tall. Wow, elected officials are always a hard act to follow. The law, that can actually be grounds for discipline or decertification. And you as a citizen can go and make a complaint, or resident of Washington, you can go make a complaint to the Criminal Justice Training Commission. If this is something that you're concerned about, I would suggest checking in with Leslie Cushman. She's sitting in the front row in a very lovely, forest green jacket, because Washington is one of very few states that do have regulations on this. So it has been an interesting path to see this regulation actually come into force and be used, for sure. But you do have an option to hold an officer accountable that way.
Thank you. I'll keep this short. I've already talked enough. But I would just say that, I'm not a genius. There are groups out there that are doing this work. I stand on their shoulders. Western States is one of them. But there are many others. And obviously the work that Unidos is doing, NAACP. These groups are going to need your support. As you know, federal dollars are rapidly shrinking in the environment. So, make sure that you're supporting the organizations that are doing the work that you find helpful in your community.
Thank you. So we wanted to ask, in these times when things are so difficult, what is giving you hope and what are you excited to work on these days?
I'll start. That's another great question. And what gives me hope is when I come to events like this. And I mean that sincerely. When he called me a few weeks ago and asked if I would attend, I remember the first thing I thought about is I said, you know what, I would probably drive across 4 states in a snowstorm to be here. And I mean that because the only way we're going to change things is that we step up and participate. And what also gives me hope is, my wife, she's at probably a rally right now somewhere or on the computer looking for a rally to go to. But I think when you many, many years ago, and I remember he talked about the FBI being 75% male and 80% white. I'll give you a number that you might do some math on later on. When I started with the State Patrol, there were 780 state troopers. 7 of us were black. And I have to tell you, it had to be the loneliest world in the world to go to work every day. And I'm seeing that we're changing that culture, and Senator Dhingra knows exactly what I'm going to talk about. We're changing that culture by bringing in different people into the profession. And I'm going to stop now, but I'm going to share with you before I go to talk about some of the regional academies that we're training. And you'll go out and look at the class and see members who represent that community. And I know they're changing. And I was at a parade in Snohomish earlier